Hello, everybody, and welcome to the December 8th Trips and Traps. Richard Migliori, Andy Serling.
Well, we're hitting that time of year where the last turf races of Trips and Traps will have, actually, the very last turf race of Trips and Traps for 2016.
Yeah, we're going to show a turf race. It's a little hard because horses will go to Florida. We don't know when we'll see them again. But there's some interesting stuff, and sometimes it's good just to talk about riding and situations. I think a lot of what comes up in the show are decisions that riders had to make and tough situations they got in. Now, the first race that we want to show you, however, is the first race from Thursday, December, I think it's December 1st. And we want to show you a first-time starter named Gun for Hire, who ends up finishing second, who broke slowly, and Jose Ortiz rode this horse. There's been some chatter with people that were confused about Jose's ride, and I really want Richie to talk about what went on during this race and the trouble the horse had and Jose had with him.
Well, let's first talk about everything he did right down the backstretch. Horse didn't break particularly well. He's a young horse. You got to get their mind in the game. He rode this horse into the race, into position, got his mind on run. But the thing people need to remember is these aren't cars. They're flesh and blood. They're animals, and they do have minds of their own. And especially when they're young and inexperienced, they may do things that the rider doesn't exactly want them to do, Andy.
Yeah, and he's riding him hard to get him into the race. I mean, frankly, he rides this horse basically the entire way, except when the horse props around the turn. And we're going to see that. We're going to demonstrate it. And Richie has a very good theory on why it happened. You can see right here, he's riding into the two duelers, probably feeling pretty good. And just about here, we're going to stop it. But just after we stop it, you're going to see this horse stops himself. Jose didn't stop him.
No, you could see the whole horse's body language changed. His head came up. He jumped to his right lead, jumped back to his left lead. And I think it's because he caught up with the kickback, the throwback from the other horses. He was far enough behind earlier where it wasn't affecting him. And then as he got closer to it, it hit him full on in the face, flush in the face, and he reacted negatively to it. Jose Ortiz rode this horse as hard as you could ride a horse, and he's been riding almost everything like that. This guy wants to be leading rider in the country. He's going to Parks on his days off to try to accumulate enough wins before he takes his Christmas break, and we'll take another look at it. Keep an eye on his head carriage. I think this is critical when you talk about horses propping. Watch the way he changes. His head was out and down, and now his head is up, and that wasn't the rider doing that. That was the horse doing that, and he actually ducked back in behind these horses. And Jose, I think, probably was taken somewhat by surprise because he hadn't shown any sign of doing it, and he did it all of a sudden. And he had a kind of steady first stride or two to make sure the horse was physically okay. And as soon as he was, look how hard he rides this horse. I think, if anything, people should be thanking Jose for riding as hard as he did to secure second, because a lot of riders might have said, whoa, maybe something's amiss, and pulled up.
I think that's a very, very good point. And keep in mind, Richard's talking about Jose Ortiz is going out of Parks. I have a feeling that Jose's first choice for what to do on his days off is probably play Gallop Racer. It's definitely not to drive down to Parks. So he's trying to go down there to win races. Now, there's no question my heart goes out to horse players to bet this horse because he was best and you should have cashed. There's no doubt about it, and it's absolutely right to be frustrated, but not to be frustrated, Jose Ortiz, because you can be certain that he was just as frustrated as you were because he rode a horse that should have won. He rode the hair off him, and it was a first-time start that cost himself the win.
Yeah, the horse caused his own problem, and I think that's something we have to remember. You know, these guys try really, really hard, and we're not above criticizing when we think there's a bad ride, but it's not always the rider's fault.
Exactly. If you're going to be critical, you also have to be fair when it's important to be fair. In this case, Jose did an awful lot right. It was the horse, a first-time starter, and that's one of the risks, and we talk about this with firsters, in kickback. They're not as used to it. They might have gotten some in workouts, but it's a different in a race situation, and maybe the second time it wouldn't have bothered him, but first-time starters, it does.
Yeah, and it's a lot different in the mornings. It's a controlled circumstance. It doesn't come back as hard because you usually go a first quarter in 24, 25 when they're working in the morning, and that's when you're behind horses. When they go 22 and change, 23, it's coming back like they're throwing rocks at you.
Well, that's the situation with that firster. We'll turn our attention to another race won by a firster, and this is the sixth race on the same day, December 1st. And the reason we're going to show this, we're going to show the one, Lunaire, who's narrowly beaten after looking like a winner. Doesn't get off that well. Of course, who has some experience. It's not that interesting a race, but I think it's important to point out that during last week, we had a dead rail, probably a bit on Wednesday, but definitely Thursday and Friday. And perhaps Lunaire, who's lugging in a little bit, maybe the rail is what got him beat. We just want people to be paying attention to horses that did get stuck down inside on those days.
Yeah, and his post position kind of sealed his fate with that. I actually like the fact that Javier Castellano, understanding that this horse had foundation, he had 3 races, He had a race going a mile. That he rode him as hard as he did into the race, knowing that he probably was fit enough to sustain that kind of a drive. He really never had an opportunity to get off the rail, so he played the hand dealt him. That, and I also think he hooked the first-time starter in Beasley. That's pretty good.
Yeah, I agree. Beasley's a promising horse for Mark Hennig. Was a very, very good bunch of 2-year-olds so far this year. Now, Javier is down sort of in the 2-path. You can see him. He's shaking the left, but he hits him righty. Now he goes down to the inside, which is where you really don't want to be. Then he comes out to try to meet Beasley a little bit. Maybe the horse slugs in. Maybe Beasley kept him in. But I think ending up down the rail at some points in this race might have cost him the win. I'm not blaming Javier.
Sure.
It's circumstance, and Beasley's okay. It's more about pointing out, look for horses that got inside trips in those days because they can come back and run much better.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think another interesting point, Beasley being by Shackelford, and we know how Shackelford liked to fight. Maybe it's a horse that liked to fight as well.
It's nice to see a Shackelford win. He was such a neat horse. We'll turn our attention to the third race on December 2nd, the King Swan. He wasn't a noted 2-year-old, but these are 2-year-olds. And the one, Petrov, I think the criticism here, and you can talk about it more, is not forcing it more, because you're going to see with Irad Ortiz, once he grabs him, the whole field grabs. And I think this is the point, it sealed his fate.
No doubt. And I think he really needed to go on. And there's no bigger fan of Irad Ortiz, and there's no bigger critic of Irad Ortiz than me. And if I have a recurring criticism of him, it's grabbing horses in that situation. The 2-horse, Lacat Warrior, who goes to the lead, is one of the horses to beat anyway. Why wouldn't you make him run to clear you instead of giving it to him and now putting yourself in a situation where you have to fight for every inch?
And he's riding pretty much the whole way after that just to hold on to his position. He's being pinned inside by the horse outside of him in here. He ends up having to bull his way out. Petrov should have won this race, and the reason he lost was, yes, he drew the rail post, but Irad did nothing to get himself out of that jackpot early.
No, and you can see how hard he's having to work to get out from behind horses, muscle his way in between horses. And this horse, to me, Andy, never really levels off until he gets completely outside the eventual winner, Even Thunder. And you're going to see, that's when he really starts making up ground.
No, I agree with all of this, because when he levels off right in here, he starts running. He should have won this race. Not knocking Even Thunder. Yes, he was unlucky with the draw, but that's the reason we talk about this. When you have the rail, you have to be aggressive, because if he had forced the other horse's hand, either he eases up in there and the other horse lets him go, or better yet, it creates enough separation so when the other horse goes around him, he can ease out outside of him, and this horse would have won.
Well, then you have options, and if you come out running like you want it, maybe the other guy defers to you, and now you come up with that softer trip where you're controlling things. I always felt like when I drew the rail, it simplified things. I need to come out running and go forward. And to me, it just, instead of having options or making excuses, I'm running because I need to hold my ground.
Right, this race ended up being run similarly to a turf race, frankly, and that's not supposed to happen in 6-furlong sprints. No. It ended up being a bunched-up field, and that worked against Petrov, a somewhat unlucky loser. Turn our attention to I think we're going to go actually to the last race now on December 2nd. It's hard to keep track. So off the turf race, the number 5, apart from the crowd, stayed in. And this horse, both of us think, ran very well. He had early trouble, he had repeated trouble, and a 2-year-old second-time starter that never stopped fighting and continued to gain ground forward despite being forced out of the race.
Well, and the 3-horse breaking out into him, taking his ground and forcing him to steady there. And then Javier wants to get his mind in the game. Young horses, again, you want to get them going forward. Well, every time he starts going forward, there's a roadblock thrown up in front of him.
Right. He's coming through between horses here. He's moving into 6th. The 3-horse probably drifts a little bit right here, and you can see him getting his forward progress. And it's amazing because he's got his forward progress. Now he loses again. He drops back about a half length or so. And this happens on a number of occasions, and a lot of horses would get intimidated. This horse did not.
No, he kept trying to run, and every time he got stymied and had to back up, you would think, well, you wouldn't blame him for throwing in the towel. He's actually going to get bounced around in here. You're going to see Javier's rear end hit the saddle at some point, so you know he's bouncing his way through some tough quarters there. Right in here, you see there. This horse was very game to continue to go forward. Meanwhile, the winner's galloping on the lead. Again, what's wrong with speed and the lead? Obviously, he didn't have that option because he got off a step slow and got bothered, but I think this horse showed a great deal of courage to continue running.
Right, and he's even getting steadied back behind here as it looks like the 16 is sort of backing up in his face, and he loses more position there and goes around. It's interesting. This horse started first time at Saratoga, and the turf was very firm. He got a slow pace. He was trying to come from well back. He was a heavy favorite first out in the turf. Chad Brown, first-time starter. Then they come back and they run him off the turf. He runs this effort, runs a 73 Beyer, vastly improved from his turf Beyer. I would leave this horse in the dirt. I think there's a chance this horse is okay in the dirt.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think he wants the dirt. He did well. You can't even believe that he finished third, and he's still running at the wire. You think about riding a bicycle, Andy, right? You pedal, you get up some speed, you pedal, and then you coast. Well, that's what kind of he was doing. Javier's pedaling, gets to where he needs to be, but now there's no place to go, so he coasts. And then he kept finding. I think this horse showed a lot of quality.
I agree, and I think these are the kind of 2-year-olds you see that are just immature. And he didn't have a particularly good trip, but he's going to benefit a great deal from this because he's already encountered some trouble. So he's going to be ready for it when it happens again, and inevitably will. Apart from the crowd is okay. I hope they run him on the dirt. I don't know if they left him here or sent him to Florida, but wherever he shows up, maybe he can run on the turf, but give this horse another chance in the dirt.
I'm with you.
We'll look at the last race, and this is one of our last grass races of the season. Now, the winner's very impressive. We're going to show 2 Chad Brown horses. The 6 horse, Complicit, who finishes third. And the 12 horse, Sophie Germain, who's a very impressive winner of this race. And this is a tale of 2 rides. One guy seizing the bull by the horns, the other one becoming a victim. They went fast early, but they dramatically slowed it up. And Joel Rosario, Richie, on Sophie Germain, he picked up on this, and he got her in the game.
I think it's one of Joel's strengths. He lets a horse get in a rhythm, and he doesn't get in the way of that rhythm. So when they went 23 the first quarter, he's well back. And he's in the same proximity as the other horse, Complicit.
Behind him.
A length behind him. So, but they're at least they're together, right? And maybe he's outside, so he has a little bit more options for him. But then they went the next quarter in 26 and change, the quarter after that in 26 and change. And the worst thing a rider could do is get in a horse's way that has run on their mind. Joel did not, and Junior really never got any kind of position.
Yeah, Sophie Germain was probably the best horse in this race, but there's a better argument the 6 should have won the race, and the 6 was right to finish third, because the 6 was no worse, because Joel now has taken the bull, seized the bull by the horns. He's now about a length and a half in front of Complicit. Sophie Germain will continue to move forward while Complicit is lingering the back. And yes, that's going to accentuate the closing kick of Complicit, no doubt about it. But with these slow fractions, Sophie Germain goes from a length behind to 6 lengths in front, Richie.
Yeah, no, you see the separation they have now. There's a good 6 lengths in between them as they head into the second turn on a 7-furlong turf course, no less. And the fact of the matter is that it wasn't that Sophie Germain was speeding up so much. It was just she was staying in her rhythm.
No, absolutely. It's almost like he let her continue to run forward. He did nothing to inhibit it. The 6 is waiting. Sophie Germain is clearing to the lead the outside right here. And here's Complicit back there. And it's like, and the 5, who was behind as well, has picked up 2 lengths on that horse. Complicit was left with way too much to do. And the point of this is, it's a number of things, talking about race dynamics and different decisions that were made. Sophie Germain is going to get all the attention out of this race, and she deserves it. She's very impressive, and if she continues on like this, she could be a nice horse. But Complicit ran very well also.
Complicit ran extremely well. Even as up until the 8th pole, she had to kind of steady come out over heels, and she's finding her best stride now. There's no argument can be made that she wasn't at least second best and potentially the best horse in the race.
Yeah, it's a difference in 2 trips, and one person understanding where the pace was going and the other person allowing himself to become a bit of a victim of it.
Well, and interestingly enough, as we're talking and over your shoulder was the gallop out on our telestrator. And Complicit ran right by Sophie Germain about 1/8 of a mile past the finish. It doesn't always tell the whole tale.
Sophie Germain used a lot more energy in getting to where she was, to be fair.
No doubt about it. But, I think that when we look at Sophie Germain's race, the first time you go, wow, she was able to make that big middle move. I'm not really of the opinion anymore she made a big middle move. She just stayed in her stride.
I agree. I think Joel let her stay in that rhythm. He didn't inhibit the rhythm. Just because you're 10 lengths behind early doesn't mean you have to stay 10 lengths behind. You can move with the flow of the race, and I think that's exactly what Joel did there.
No doubt. And that's one of his gifts as a rider. And, again, I like riders that get position and go in with the idea that they want to give their horses an opportunity to win.
I think some interesting races this week. We're going to be on the dirt going forward, the inner dirt. We can use your help. It's trips and traps at NYRANK.com.